Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. Now when you usually buy a game, what's your first impression that you get of the game? The title, the blurb, or the cover art? The answer is pretty obvious, but cover art is really what sells a video game to any person really. It's what makes a person decide whether they want to buy a game based on its first appearance, so it's important to get it done right. It's what separates the Mario Odysseys from the
Nice of the princess to invite us over for a picnic, eh, Luigi?
I hope she made lots of spaghetti!
Anyways, Sonic is more well known when it comes to video game renders and box art, with highs and lows, kind of like the franchise, which is what I want to talk about. Also, disclaimer, I know I made a vid similar to this, where I talked about the model that Sonic team have been using for around 2 decades now, but that was more of a general look at both the in-game models and the CGI renders. This one is going to be strictly 2D artwork and CGI. Maybe I'll mention the in-game models here and there, but they won't be the focus in this vid. So if you're more interested in that, please go watch the vid I made a while back in the description. Now let's get into it. Starting off with the classic art, it's important to know that there were 3 different box arts that were made for Japan, the US and Europe. All of them vary in their own way, and I think it's interesting how different those changes were, especially back then. This was when standards for box art were way more drastic, so any game could have looked completely different depending on the region. The box art in Japan uses renders made by Akira Watanabe. I really like how clean these renders look, to be honest. No line work, just solid airbrush shapes with gradients and the like. It's like they took the art that Naoto Oshima made and just made him look more 3-dimensional, and I personally think it looks the best out of the 3 styles that we're going to talk about. The backgrounds are also pretty cool, with abstract shapes and colors thrown in. It really makes the box art stand out, compared to just using like a flat color or something. Also, this is a small thing, but I like how there's a little quote of inspiration that they have on the box art too. I'm sure that you've seen Cybershell's video on this, so I'll probably link that vid into the description. Moving on to the US, this is where stuff is way different. Sega of America didn't really vibe with the design that Sonic had in Japan, so they wanted to give him more of an edgier look there to appeal better. That leads this. Yeah, it's not my favorite look that Sonic's had, to be honest. I'll probably make a vid on this in the future, but I really don't like the design that they went with here. The weird looking shark fin spikes, the butt brow, the proportions just look straight up wrong in general to me. I also want to point out a mistake that I think a lot of people have made. The artist behind the Sonic 1 box art wasn't Greg Martin, it was actually Greg Ray. You can tell this mainly due to the small differences in their styles, with Greg Ray's looking a bit more shiny with the rim lighting, at least when you compare it to Greg Martin's art. I also want to say that just because I don't vibe with this specific design of Sonic, doesn't mean that both artists' work is bad at all. I've seen their work for other franchises like Pac-Man, Looney Tunes, Disney, etc. and they are way more skilled than I could ever hope to be. And I just think that the reason Sonic looks like that is mainly because of the limited source material that they had. I read somewhere that Greg Ray only had the title screen in the first game to work off of when he made the box art, so it kind of explains why there's some liberties taken here. Besides, later on they started using the Japanese design for Sonic and it just looks so much better to me. I really love the metallic art style that both of them carry, by the way. It just looks nostalgic to me and it's something I use in my own artworks too. Usually the backgrounds in these box arts look really nice as well. I mean, they at least show more of what the game is like compared to the Japanese box art, but both ways are fine. Lastly, we have the European box art, which always had me confused growing up. For Sonic 1, they used a Japanese render with a different background with not much going on, to be honest. And then for Sonic 2, they used the American box art with literally no difference. And then they did this for Sonic 3. What were they thinking here?
You're not just wrong, you're stupid.
Why does Sonic even look like that for starters? I haven't even gotten to Knuckles yet. He's got his own problems. Everything just looks off here. Even the background showing off Carnival Night doesn't really help. After the classic games ran their course, we then got art for spin-offs and side games for the 32X and the Saturn, and this is where I think you'll start to see more of the weird sides to renders being made. For starters, take a look at this. This was a render made for Sonic 3D Flicky's Island for Europe, and it didn't age well. Like, ignoring how off Sonic looks here, why is the background just flat black? I mean, this worked with Sonic and Knuckles, not with this. He just looks weird here, and that's an understatement. In the US, it wasn't much better, with the renders just looking bare bones at best and just no at worst. In Japan, we actually got some really nice art by Satoshi Okano, and his style looks really cool here. He really went all in with how Sonic is based off of Rubber Hose characters, and this leads into Sonic Jam, where he'd be handling the box art with Yuji Uekawa, who I'll talk about more later. But the art here reminds me a lot of the art of the classics in Japan, just with way looser posing. Sonic just looks more dynamic here, and the only real differences between regions at this point was just the backgrounds. The last game that we're going to talk about here is Sonic R, since that was the first game where I think that the 3D renders look really good. The model that they use for Sonic here is way better than what they used for the last Sonic 3D Blast renders, and it makes Sonic translate way better in 3D compared to before. The posing on the render is really good, the 3 silhouette is there, and he looks dynamic with the run. In general, this looks pretty solid. Definitely what I think is the first render to match the classics in 3D. Obviously, you know the whole story with how Sonic Adventure was made and how redesigning Sonic came as a part of that. The box art for Sonic Adventure to me is like the definition of cool. You have Sonic in a pose which is like referenced countless times today, and yeah, the background might look a little bit plain to some people, but I think it gives off like the war aesthetic perfectly, since it already tells you that it has something to do with it from the title alone as well. And to be honest, the 3D renders are just as good. Some of these renders look way ahead of their time, with this one being a favorite of mine. I like how they're also still trying to keep the practice of drawing over these renders to fix anything that looks off in 3D. For example, right, take a look at this render of Sonic running. I think it looks really cool, but without it, you can see how even then, just using a 3D model on its own wouldn't have been enough. I hope Sega comes back to doing this again someday, since it helped a lot with expressions and stuff. This kept on going with Adventure 2, with the background looking similar to 1, but the contrast in colors looks kinda dope to me. The 3D renders also carry the same vibe that Adventure 1 had too, with the soap shoes looking clean as well. I also want to talk about how Uekawa's style shifted slowly across the advanced games to Rush, since it slowly started to become more and more angular with each game. And I mean, by the time Sonic Rush or Sonic Rush Adventure came out, compare the art of those games to Sonic Adventure 1 and it just goes to show how refined it got. Personally, I prefer the art of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, since I just like the more rubber hose poses and shapes, but that doesn't mean Uekawa's layer art isn't good. I mean, even the art he made from Rush Adventure onwards still has a lot of bangers for me, and I like how different and varied the rendering style he has nowadays are too. When Sonic Heroes came out, this was the first 3D Sonic game to use models for their primary promotional art instead of 2D renders. To be honest, there weren't any 2D specific artworks of Heroes that I could find for the game. Instead, Sega just thought they must have been confident enough to include 3D renders instead, and to be honest, it's just kinda 50-50 for me. On one hand, the models themselves look really faithful to Uekawa's style, since the series still used his designs as a standard. The Nike smirk, the proportions, the poses, it all looks good on that side, but the textures and the materials on those models are just not it for me. I get that they wanted to emulate the shading seen on the 2D artwork, but the execution was such a miss. Like, why did they look like they made out of plastic for one? What's with the weird ass shine that's on them? Either way, I think that's what a lot of people criticize about these renders. And if they just put more thought into improving the materials on these models, I guarantee that they would have been way better received, since the renders before weren't nearly this bad. If there's any of you that have played Shadow the Hedgehog, which, I mean, who wouldn't if you didn't want to hear this? The studio behind the intro for that game was Blur Studio, and they were also responsible for the renders for that game. Now, I'm gonna link a vid in the description and probably put in the tab if you want to see it for yourself. It's where I talk a little bit more in depth on this issue, but to summarize it quickly, I think that the in-game models for Sonic Heroes will most likely use as the basis for the CGI models for the intro in Shadow 05 and the renders too, since they share the same proportions in places like the face, the body, the shoes, etc. And I think this is where we get our first look at the modern Sonic model. A lot of people think that it started in 2007 with Sonic and the Secret Rings, but it was even earlier than that. The models themselves look really good since, the guys at Blur Studio are really good at their jobs obviously, but it's still kinda limited by the technology at that time. Take a look at this render of Sonic. Sure, it looks okay until you notice weird little things like this crease in his leg. Stuff like this will be improved later on, but it just goes to show you that there were problems like this even back then. Sonic 06 is one of the more controversial Sonic games when it comes to stuff like art design, environments, etc. But even though I don't really like the idea of Sonic in a realistic world, look at what this kind of thinking led to. The renders for Sonic and the rest of them look really good here. Even the box art slaps, to be honest, just take a look. The cool pose, the motion blur around him, it works well, especially since this was meant to be like a soft reboot of the series. The renders themselves even look good. Most of the ones for Sonic keep in the loose posing that he had back in the Dreamcast era. The textures on this model look really nice too, since while I think the most logical option would have been to give Sonic fur, and they did try it, I still think that the result looks pretty good. I really like the renders where you see Sonic Shadow and Silver side by side, and the amount of edginess just kinda speaks for itself. If you remember what I told you about the modern Sonic model not starting from Secret Rings, that's because this is where the models started to become more mainstream in games. Sega must have thought that this model looked really impressive, and like I said, if you saw that intro from Shadow 05, then it makes sense why they'd want to start using this model more. I still like that they added stuff like the Nike smirk, or at least something similar to that. I remember that they were going for something like that in the game's beta footage, so it's good to see them keeping the same energy with stuff like that. The box art itself doesn't look amazing or anything. I like the idea behind it, having Sonic in the center with the flames on one side and then darkness on the other. The composition of it just looks good and all. I just think it falls kind of flat in the posing. Sonic looks just a little bit too stiff here, and I think they could have forced more of a perspective on his hand too. I just prefer the Japanese box art for this game, to be honest, since the lighting on it just looks a lot cooler, and it just has a way better pose for me. From what I know though, Blur Studio wasn't the one to work on this game, so maybe the change in studios was the reason, since the model was made by them. Sonic Unleashed is one of those games that you have to admit is the best looking Sonic game, at least graphics wise. Mars Animation Planet was the studio behind the CG opening for this, and even though I could talk about that intro all day, I'm pretty sure it's drilled into every Sonic fan's head by now, they also made the CG renders and the box art for the game. Personally, I think that this is where the model that they'd been using up until this point peaked for me. The lighting, the general look of the model itself, it just looks like it would fit in a Pixar movie, and I'm pretty sure that's the idea that they had going into the development of this game. The box art is really good too, with both Sonic and the Werehog representing both the day and night cycles pretty clear. Though I think if they added parts of the Japanese box art, where they show the different countries you can visit as a part of the background, it'd show a lot more of what the game offers. Going back to what I said before though, every render in this game is a banger. Though I'm confused at why a couple of them use the in-game model for some reason. I think that's the only iffy looking part of these renders with base Sonic anyways. The Werehog renders all look pretty solid too, with the fur being the most impressive part to me. I genuinely don't know how they managed to make fur look this good on a character in a game from 2008. The next game to come out is Sonic and the Black Knight, with it really being the coolest this Sonic design has looked. Just look at how cool the box art is, with Sonic holding Caliburn, and I think having King Arthur show up in the background was just a really cool choice too. But the render of Sonic here, I really like how they try to keep that 3-kill silhouette, even when he's upright in a pose like that. It just reminds me a lot of Junior Sonic from the Sonic CD opening, to be honest. The Japanese box art is also pretty dope. I really like how the red background looks in this one when you contrast it with Sonic's blue fur. As far as the renders go though, it's like what they had going with in Unleashed. Like I said before, I think that both of these games have this model look the best, but it still doesn't get rid of the problems that these models have. If anything, it just highlights them going forward. From here we're going to skip to Sonic Colors, where we're going to start to see that the quality of this model is just going to go down. Though in this game it's only kinda slightly. The box art looks really cool too, with Sonic jumping out of the laser wisp and showing Eggman land in the background. It does a good job showing what the game's going to include. But the renders for this model of Sonic just start to fall flat for me. At this point it's only the little things though. Like for one, they just stopped using the Amazon smile that Sonic had in his renders before this point. So now they just use the mouth on the model itself without any touch-ups. This is just going to get important a little bit later, but for now it's fine I guess. I would have preferred if they had done it, but in this game it's tolerable. That's not to say that there isn't anything to like in these renders. That's definitely not the case, since some of the poses in these renders are really cool. Like this one with Sonic running alongside the Wisp. I like how his hand is out, since it just makes the pose look a little bit more dynamic and cool. If you remember what I said about the model starting to fall flat, this is where it just starts to get really bad. Sonic 4 came out in the same year as Sonic Colors, and it genuinely has some of the most bland renders of this model ever. I don't like these renders at all, and I'll explain why. For one, the lighting of these renders is so muddy and it doesn't really take into account how lighting should work, with the shading mostly being a black color. Unleashed didn't do this, at least not this badly, which makes the result just look a little bit more stale. And remember the stuff I mentioned about the Amazon mouth not being used again after Black Knight? Well, I didn't really mind it too much in colors, but this is just kind of what it led to. And it just has some disgusting looking underlip on the model, thanks to the clunky shading highlighting it more. It just looks nasty on a character like Sonic, and I don't get why this hasn't been gone completely yet, even nowadays. This type of rendering style continued on with episode 2, and I just don't get why they thought that this looked good or even passable as renders for the title screen of your video game. I mean, just look how much they butchered Uekawa's concept piece for it. Nowadays these renders are just put everywhere, merch, different mobile games, etc. There's just something Sonic related with these renders showing up that you had to have seen at least once. Sonic Generations released in 2011, 1 year after Colors, keeping up the same type of style that it had with its renders. But while mine and Sonic's renders are more the same, I really want to talk about classic Sonic's renders, since this is a game that brought him back from the classic games. Even though I have problems with this design of classic Sonic, I just don't like the idea of merging both the American and Japanese designs into one. By the way, take a look at my vid on classic Sonic if you want to know more about what I think of this version of classic Sonic in general. I still really like the renders that classic Sonic has here, especially with how a lot of them references art from the classic games. For one, I think this model of classic Sonic is just rigged a lot better than modern Sonic is, and that's probably why he's able to pull off way better expressions, both in game and in these renders. But I never really liked the constant use of the butt brow in him. Like, he doesn't have to have that all the time. They even showed it in the trailer for Gens that it isn't like that. I think my favorites though have to be one where he's referencing Sonic Spinball, and that one piece of concept art from when he's about to run like from Sonic 1. To me, they just look like the best for this version of classic Sonic, compared to what comes later at least. We then skip over to Sonic Lost World in 2013, with the box art just being kind of a miss, to be honest. It's like it tried to do what Gens did, but it just flopped at it. For starters, the background elements ripped off Gens, but this time there's not as much effort to see compared to that, and it just has the Deadly Six shown off in the distance with nothing else besides the Lost Hex background. Compared to Gens, it just doesn't feel the same. Kinda how I felt about that game in general, to be honest. And the renders aren't looking much better, with this one looking really dopey. Like, why is his eye just like that? I ain't gonna go over Boom since it's not a mainline game, so I guess I'm just gonna skip to...
Hey guys! I found Sonic!
Really?
Yeah, here he is!
Hi, everybody.
Oh!
And the box art just kinda speaks for itself. Why is everything so cluttered? There isn't any space left for any of the other characters to breathe, so everything just had to be put in here. They put in characters who get folded not even halfway into the story, so why include them? I also don't really like how boring some of the poses are for some of these characters. Like Tails and Classic Sonic just look like they're there, they ain't really doing anything. The renders don't really look that appealing either, with the model starting to show its age by now. Modern Sonic just looks way too stiff and serious, and the worst part is he hasn't got the worst looking renders here, Classic Sonic does. It's like they saw the complaints that Classic looked too cute and not serious enough like before, but the execution just looks so wrong. This image is used everywhere when talking about Classic now, by the way. Also, just to go through Mania, I think that this is a massive upgrade from Forces, and it just shows how the Classics had it better with their simplicity. Tom Fry took heavy inspiration from the Japanese box arts, and I think it just shows how timeless they were. If you switch the background color from yellow to white, you wouldn't be able to tell if anything was different. And while I think the poses could be a bit more dynamic in the main box art, there's a separate cover that looks like the Americanized version of it while still using the Japanese designs, but with a very cool looking background and more dynamic poses. So it's a win for me. Frontiers was the next Sonic game to release, coming out in 2022, and with that we actually have a pretty decent box art this time around. I like how it's just Sonic grinding on a rail in the background, though I think I prefer the Japanese box art a lot more. I just like how we see Sonic running off with more of a focus on the background. Really gives off that Breath of the Wild energy that this game has, you know? When it comes to the renders, they look okay, I guess. The poses have the same problem that some of Force's renders had, with them just looking too safe in a way. They just don't stretch in the same way that the older 2D art looked. To be honest, I think the 3D renders do a better job with that. Like this one render Sonic with the soap shoes just looks pretty cool to me. I like this line of action on him, and the perspective of his hand here. Finally, we have the most recent release, Sonic X Shadow Generations, and the box art is pretty cool, all things said. I think that because it's a Gens remaster, it still has the same type of aesthetic going on, just with Shadow added in the center, and the addition of Black Doom and Shadow's own white space at the top of the box art. The renders for both Sonics just look eh. I've seen posts where people say that this specific render can be put into like office spaces, and it wouldn't look out of place, and that's just how I feel about the Model 2, to be honest. Some of Shadow's renders have dynamic poses, but I still think it needs improvements, especially since the model for it was built off of Sonic's, meaning that they suffer from the same kind of problems, like the mouth and ears for example. I like the human renders though, with Gerald and Maria both looking really good. I like how good they look in HD for once, since, well, they didn't look the best before. I guess the final question is if the renders are going to get better in the future. Well, Sega have made a point that they're going to invest more time and budget into Sonic Team, hiring more people and hopefully adding a lot more quality control to future games. When Frontiers was coming out, one of the critiques that most fans gave to the director over on Twitter was how the models looked. So I think by now, Sonic Team knows about this, especially with how there's been fan videos showing different models reminiscent of SA1 and 2. And I think that they'll update these models probably in the next mainline game. At least that's what I think. It still feel like Whiplash if they stuck with the same model even after all of this has happened though. Thanks for watching the video. Please make sure to like and subscribe for future content, as well as letting me know what your thoughts on this vid were and the renders of Sonic that you thought were your favorites. And I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.